Namaste and welcome. It's my pleasure today to introduce Mona Roy from Lexington, who has been active in various state and local initiatives surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion and mental health for decades. At the local level, she serves on Lexington's Human Rights Commission and the Lex 250 Commission, co-chairs IAL's Education Subcommittee, has served Lexington for decades in various capacities relating to mental health, education, and other DEI issues. Beyond Lexington, she is part of the organizing team and serves on the board of CARE, the Coalition for Anti-Racism Equity. She also serves as a member of the team's Patient Experience Board to improve the healthcare experience for neurodiverse patients. She is a partner at her law firm and serves on the advisory boards of multiple nonprofits. She also teaches Tagore's music at the local Bengali school. And really, as a parent of a neurodiverse child, she really emphasizes the value of all human life and the need for universal love, dignity, understanding, and acceptance. Mona, what a pleasure it is to have you on Lokvani. Pleasure to have you here today. Namaste.
Pleasure to be here. It's really wonderful to be here.
This is great. I mean, to see all the amazing work that you have done. But today, particularly, I'm interested to see your take. You are, working so much in equity and all of this on the Supreme Court ruling that just came out, saying that Harvard and I think University of North Carolina, cannot use affirmative action anymore. So can you please break that down for us? I know that many Asian Americans felt it was an important ruling. So could you first break down that ruling for us and to later on think about really how does it impact the Indian American community?
So to break down such a complex case, I think is a little, would take a lot of time, but I really want to kind of boil it down to its essence, which is that particularly for the Harvard case, which is, I think, what a lot of us New Englanders tend to focus on. The admissions process that they have now is that they go through they curate a group of people that they feel they're all qualified to go to Harvard. And then they have a final process called LOP, where they look at a few factors, including legacy, whether or not, your parents or grandparents or such went to Harvard, financial aid, whether or not you have some sort of athletic ability that they're looking for an athletic recruit, and race. And what ends up happening is that they have this big pool of people that could go to Harvard, but they want to winnow it down to the number of admission seats that they want to offer. And so they end up looking at these four factors, and then that's how they decide their final who gets an acceptance letter, so to speak. Right. And so it certainly is, and it was a requirement. So Harvard's requirement that race be a consideration at the end is no longer sanctioned by the court. It used to be that you had to consider race, and now you don't. And that Harvard's admissions, that was their model, and now they don't. So to be clear, that doesn't mean that other factors can't be considered during the process. So for example, somebody could, in their essays, really put forth their stories and their struggles and they can, and that certainly should. That is something that they can consider, but they just can't do it at the end. And I find Harvard's, purported sadness of this very interesting, because you'll notice that the Supreme Court also did not cut down legacy. They did not really. I don't know if you know this. Did you know that I read someplace that 43% of the white students at Harvard have come in through legacy or either legacy, donor, or athletics. It's really shocking. I don't know. Other people said they weren't shocked. I was quite shocked. And I didn't hear Harvard saying that they want to get rid of that to increase diversity. So I find Harvard's dismay at this a little. I find it interesting. Yeah. And I think within our own Indian American community, I wear many different hats, and there's always been this feeling that, well, it's harder if you're AAPI, if you're Indian American, it's just very, very, it's just harder. The bar is higher, and studies have shown to some extent that's true. If you could, that's empirical. That is actually empirically true. But the question is, will this decision make it any better? And so I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have the internet. And so I think many of us may remember when this happened with University of California. So the assumption was that this was going to be really great for the Asian community. This was going to be really great for the Asian community. And the first couple of years when we were paying attention, it seemed like it was. But as time has gone on, the number of admitted AAPIs over the number of AAPI applicants, in other words, the acceptance rate has actually gone down.
Wow.
Since it changed. Yes, I think that's something that people don't realize. And I don't blame people for not realizing that, because how would you, the first couple of years, and then and also because people keep assuming that that somehow these systems, I find it quite stunning that people would assume that the plaintiffs in this case were very, very interested in fairness to the AAPI population. I just, that is not really the case. Otherwise, somebody could have sued for something else. But instead, and SCOTUS, for all their hand wringing, their decision, they didn't seem super concerned about any of these things either. So
I think what you're saying is that actually the issue, with whatever privileged or admissions based on non-merit things, actually there's a lot, and that's still in place. I mean, it's legacy, it is donor related, and many other things, and that privilege, it is actually valid for privileged people, not for underprivileged people, who often we say, okay, they are the ones who are taking away seats from the Asian Americans. That thought comes into people's mind, but it is really the privileged people, and nothing has been done to touch that part of the admission process at all.
Well, I mean, the whole point of privilege is to hang on to it. if that is the truth. The people who have power, they don't want to give it up. They will package it any way and every way to hang on to privilege. You just need to look at the power structures. You just need to see who's in power, who's making the decisions. And the number one determinant, I believe, of someone's outcome, I believe, is their zip code. So of course, there are other ways they could. And the truth is, schools have been looking at other ways to, but they're not looking. Many other, I hate to pick on Harvard because they're right down the street, but many other schools have gotten rid of legacy admission. They just legacy preferences. They've absolutely gotten rid of it because they realize that there's baked in bias there. And so they've gotten rid of that. But there are many, probably outside this conversation, but there are many other opportunities Harvard and other colleges have to continue to try to have a diverse student body. And I do want to say something that echoes something that Michelle Obama said, which is very important today, which is that it is important for all of our youth, our future leaders, to go, and a lot of our future leaders do come out of these schools. We want those schools to have a diverse student body. That is very, very important, because without a diverse student body, they won't really get the complete education. How will you, and you'll go to law school, you'll go to med school, but how will you take care of your clients or treat your patients with care if you haven't had authentic relationships with people of different races? So I think that it's very important in our own Desi community that we recognize that sadly this will not help us, and also that we should really embrace and celebrate the opportunities to have authentic relationships with people across different racial and cultural identities.
Very, very good point you're saying. And I know that you're working on a lot of, to promote that kind of equality. A question that often comes up, which confuses many people, is what is the difference between equity and equality? And, should we be working for equity or equality, or are they same, different?
Oh, so no, equity and equality are not the same at all, except for the first three letters. So equality, I'm not even sure what equality means. I guess, is that by objective factors, but, we'll take equity is really about making sure that people have not equal outcomes, but sort of, more fair and balanced opportunities. So for example, I'll give you my example. I'm 5 foot. You can't tell on Zoom. I look super tall on Zoom, but I'm 5'0". So if I have to reach a glass versus my son, my much taller son, I'm going to need a step stool. I can, and if I try really, and if I don't, I could break a glass. So I'm going to need a little help because I don't necessarily have the same height advantages that someone that someone else does similarly. And so we want to have systems, but that would be too bad. Like, do you just want me to not get the glass? You want me to be able to get the glass. So we want a system where we give everyone the opportunity for equal outcomes. And even then, there aren't equal outcomes. The system, you mentioned the Lex 250. I'm on this commission to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the shot heard around the world in Lexington. I'm really, really are the first shot of the American Revolution. And we're super proud of that. And there are a lot of great things that this country represents. But we're still working towards a more perfect union.
Yeah.
And one of the ways we do that is by being honest about our history, being honest about zip code outcomes, who has what advantages, where there's unconscious bias, whether it's baked into the media or educational materials or in our neighborhoods. We really have to think about how to make those systems more equitable and more honest so that our country as a whole succeeds.
Beautiful. I think really, I think one very important point you touched upon is working on educational, materials, and also starting, I think, early, in middle school, where these ideas kind of bake into kids' heads. I know that you've been working in the Lexington system, especially with the Indian, I think, curriculum for the Indian kids. So and they about representing the Hindu religion and other things. I would love to hear from you, Mona, about your work and how successful has it been, and what should other people in the group, in the area do to ensure such activity goes on in their own communities.
So I want to start at the outset by saying that in Lexington, we've been very fortunate to have good relation. I have friends across multiple racial groups. And so what we have done is the Chinese group, the Indian group, our ABCL, which is our Association of Black Citizens of Lexington, we've actually all gone to our DEI person and said, listen, we have some concerns about the curriculum and we would like to have open discussions about that, because we only know what we know. So because I'm Indian, and to be clear, I should be honest, I'm born and brought up in America. So I grew up on very bad curriculum myself. I'm just very fortunate that at home, a lot, the misinformation about India was at least mitigated, but certainly the misinformation about everything else was not. So I too come to the table, with half information. So we've been able to put together, we have my co-chair is a licensed social studies teacher. We have some very smart people on our team who are definitely willing to look through the curriculum and say, okay, no, we, India does have indoor plumbing, thanks. Just if you saw that, I'm a little ashamed to tell you of all the things we had to say, no. And the good news is, because we are not here as criticizers, but collaborators. Ultimately, when we talk about, again, we're responsible for supporting our teachers and our school system to make sure that they are not, inadvertently giving out misinformation. It's not their fault. They get the textbooks from, who knows where, and they're doing, and we're lucky. We have really some great teachers and a great system where they want to hear, because they don't work very hard to teach bad information. And one of the nice things, I don't know how it is in other towns, but our town, one of my son's teachers said, I'm telling you all this, but you should know that the history is written by the victors. So you should have critical thinking skills and you should question everything. Wow. And, I think he was not afraid, to be honest. He just said, so don't be afraid to question and do the research. Look at secondary resources, look at facts, look at other versions of the truth, because the truth is somewhere in the middle. So I thought that was very bold and courageous of his teacher, but actually, apparently that's how it is in many classes here. So, and I can tell you, I'm in my mid-50s, and I can tell you that I'm very glad that we're finally having these conversations. You asked what parents should be doing. Yeah. My parents knew, and they did nothing, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't have the financial standing, the political standing, the safety standing in those days back in the 70s. And, to really say, hey, this is, it's very dangerous. It was a very, much dangerous time in Lexington. And, and then when my son and the next generation had this misinformation, I felt like, well, what should I do? And, the kids are like, don't be that parent. But now I think it's important that the parents minimally most Indian parents, I'll tell you, look at their kids' math homework and science homework,
Yeah,
but they don't all look at their kids' social studies homework. And if
absolutely.
we all come together and do this work, which is going to take a long time and will take many iterations, we can really dismantle racism
Yeah,
at the beginning. Because one of the reasons we have racism in the first place, one of our most people go to public school,
yeah,
and and they get the curriculum. And if you see a Eurocentric lens, which is frankly a colonizer lens,
yeah.
if that's the view that you're seeing, then of course you're going to think less of brown kids. And what do when there's a term that's used in education, windows and mirrors,
Yeah.
and also now sliding doors, that's a new one added. But really, when our brown kids, when our Desi kids look in the mirror and they see a curriculum that's not reflecting them positively, or their heritage positively,
Right.
or their faith positively, that's a problem. And what are their classmates seeing? Their classmates are also seeing, a distorted, diminished view. And that is something that every parent has a responsibility to call out
Yeah.
in support.
Yeah, and I think the impact of that is very, very far-reaching, because I mean, when I saw the work that the SB 403 caste legislation coming up in California, the legislator says she learned about caste in her middle school 6th grade textbook. That's where she learned about it. So knowing that she has such a leaving the politics of it, knowing that she has such a wrong information, where you see Brahman and Brahmin being confused
Exactly.
continuously, and
Yeah.
irrelevant information being presented. I think I'm so glad that you're working on. And I was going to say swastika continues to be a
I know that's
misunderstood
right.
topic.
It's
So
shocking.
yeah,
It's
but
shocking.
I think this is great that you're working on it, and it seems like and exactly what you said. I think the teachers are very, very open, and I think for other people as well to come
Yeah.
together and work on these with your school committees, I think that's an important thing. And I think you are actually working on a legislation
Yes.
regarding
Yes.
education. Oh, you want to talk about that a little
Sure.
bit?
Michelle mentioned that briefly. So I do this locally. I do this locally. Even in my non-existent spare time, because I think education is really the path to success. But Lexington is, a well-resourced town. There are many people who, there are people who can advocate. But what about the other towns? What about the, less diverse towns, the more homogeneous towns? What about the under-resourced towns? And so in those towns, they also need decolonized curriculum. And whenever I say that, people get very scared. So maybe I should just say, look, they just need accurate. This is 2023. Our kids are already have to compete in the 21st century global economy. And, they have to be culturally competent. If Massachusetts is not producing students, if our education system is not producing students that are culturally competent by getting a well-balanced education, how are they going to fare in Seoul and Samsung? I mean, we want, and in a sense, our Indian kids might be, I hate to say it, but the kids of immigrants, they might actually be a little bit more advantaged because they're used to navigating different cultural spaces. But what about people who aren't the kids of immigrants, right? Yeah. So it's very, very important that we support this initiative across the state. So the short of the legislation is that we are the CARE stands for a coalition for anti-racism and equity, and we are proud to be a part of the team that helped bring forth legislation to legislation that will mandate DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, to require schools to develop a curriculum, and DESE would develop some frameworks around that, to have more information on underrepresented groups and underrepresented ethnic identities. And I think that in and of itself is very important, because again, if your education is Eurocentric, what are you, what are you learning? So I think and so I'm really great. It takes up a lot of time. I think the political process is a bit challenging, but I truly believe, I was fortunate the other day. I was at the Boston Public Library, so I happened to ask this question to Governor Healy. And on the Jim and Marjorie show, I just mentioned, and she actually said she was very much interested in teacher diversity. Wow. Because we don't have a lot of teachers of color. And I said, but and then actually I didn't say it. The host actually said it. The host, I think Jim, he said, But, how are you going to get people of color excited to be in education if the curriculum doesn't really reflect their, so I think we have a lot of work to do, but good work. This is good, this is good work. And I hope that everybody will join me in this, because it's great to have, I know I know our community is doing well.
Right.
Well, I mean, our community is doing well in many ways, but we have to recognize that a lot of those people, that's about the first, or maybe I think first generation, immigrants or first generation,
Is there a website that, and we can share it on this video?
Oh, yes,
I absolutely. Yes. I will put that, send it to me, and I'll put it on the video so that people can follow it and, talk to their legislators and, make sure that there's more interest. And I'll put up your, contact information as well. So if people want to talk to you about that, we will do that as well. So actually, it was very interesting. You said that people are doing well, right? Our community is doing well. And this is always a little bit of a challenge when you say that API, people are feeling discriminated, there's racism against API, and yet you see, CEOs, and you are a fine example, you're a partner at your law firm. So, could you talk a little bit about that? And, why is it that we are succeeding in some, and yet there is huge amount of racism, that's out there?
Yeah, I should really clarify that. So it is absolutely true. And yes, Asian Americans do well. And I want to really zone in particularly that Indian Americans, I think we might have the highest per capita earning income. Yeah. I don't know if that's changed. I believe that's still true. And so the assumption is, well, if Indian Americans are doing so well financially, then there must be no racism against them. If anything, they're the racists, they must be the oppressors. They have the highest income. But actually, that really erases sort of the data behind it. Most Indian Americans are actually immigrants. Most of them are immigrants. And so, which means that, going back to my curriculum thing, they grew up in a country where their racial, ethnic, religious identities were affirmed. They grew up in a country where they were affirmed. And by definition, the way our immigration system is set up, the visa system, really, it's it's educated people who come here. This is, the way the system is now. I mean, even the educated people are waiting in a big line to get, their immigration approved. So it is understandably, the Indians who come here are educated and they're in those sorts of jobs. Then their kids, the first generation, do well, because study after study has shown, I don't know, there was some Fortune magazine or some article I'd read where something like somewhere between 40 and 50% of Fortune 500 companies are started by an immigrant or the kid of an immigrant. So wow. Yeah, even I think DuPont, some of these big companies, they are started by immigrants, and it's important to note that, because or first generation, because I think it can give us a very distorted view. And I don't blame. It's very hard. The Indian community works very hard in Lexington. Not only are they have almost like 3 separate jobs. They have their jobs, then they have their kind of cultural stuff that they do a lot, a lot of volunteer, and then they work very hard to volunteer in Lexington too, just in the schools and everything. So everybody's just very, very busy. But so it's really hard to take the time to reflect on what the decisions that we're making today, how they will impact our generations down the line. You brought up the, I know it's not a Massachusetts issue, but there's a legislation in California. There's been some other issues with caste. And I don't want to spend too much time on that per se, except for to say that, that in of itself is rooted in racism, right? Most Hindus are Indian, most Indians are Hindus. And so, it's hard for someone who's here now to say, well, I don't understand. We're doing really well. I don't know any racism. And even if I do, I mean, I'm still rich, I'm still doing pretty well, and we're doing well. And, my kid's getting in, or kid is getting into a good school. It just feels very, and if you're looking at today, you're like, well, I mean, so we're doing great. In any case, I don't discriminate, which, I don't believe in caste. But I think what's very hard for them to picture, understandably, is a generation or two down the line. I mean, forget a generation or two. Can I tell you, I actually don't even know I didn't really learn about caste when I was a kid, and my parents don't believe in those things. And then my kid has no understanding. He's like, what caste were you? I'm like, why would you ask that question? So 3 generations, my grandkids or that generation, they'll have no idea, but they'll still, they might be somewhat Indian or who knows what, but if they're Indian, Hindu, which I would hope that, we would carry on our religious traditions, they won't even know where to start.
Yeah,
So, and I think
exactly.
that's really hard for people to imagine. It's, my reason for existence, it feels for different these days feels like, it is about DEI, and I want everyone to be included, accepted, and I want everyone to belong. I want everyone to not just belong, but both feel that they belong and actually belong, and that's what I want. And so to me, it's very important that we understand. And I hope our community, I don't blame anybody for anything, but I hope those who, feel so moved would really look into these issues more and ultimately think about their kids and their non-existent grandkids, right?
Yeah.
So, right? That's the thing. Today, it's like, I got to get my
Yeah.
kid through middle school and high school, but
Yeah.
tomorrow, this is about, because actually we won't even need to do anything. If your kids go to school and I was fortunate, I was super affirmed at home, but if we don't affirm our kids at home, then they're not going to feel when they go off to college, they'll believe it. And that would be tragic.
Well, that's a beautiful final note to conclude this interview. So definitely we will put up your website and all the wonderful work you're doing. Thank you for the work you're doing. And I agree that—
For your work. Lokvani is such a fabulous resource. And, when we first moved here in the last century, we counted on it very much to really with the pulse of the community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And we look forward to working together to make a better union. We are all—
Yes, we will always work towards a more perfect union.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mona. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.